If you're wondering how to catch bass consistently at night, then this podcast is for you. I was joined by Bill Payne, a slow-talking old sage from North Georgia who's got over 40-something years experience in both night fishing tournaments and as a successful guide. And he sits down with me and we just have a good conversation where he imparts a little bit of wisdom and drops a lot of juice. You guys are going to enjoy it. Sit back and check it out. Okay, Bill, so we're in the middle of May right now, and a lot of the big lakes are starting to see a lot more traffic, you know, on the Saturdays and the Sundays when a lot of guys have time to fish. And so as custom, a lot of the fishing is going to be starting to go at night. A lot of the tournaments are going to night tournaments and everything. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I want you to kind of give us a really good deep dive into what happens after dark. And before we turn the cameras on, you kind of made a statement, and I want you to start off with that statement about the tournaments.
Well, most of the tournaments, a lot of them have already started. Some of them have been going on for weeks, and basically, you know, they start at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, and they're over at 9:30, 10:30, or 11 o'clock, and really you don't get much fishing after dark. They're more evening tournaments, and you got to start off with techniques that work in the daytime. And then in these tournaments, a lot of the fish haven't even made the transition over to the nighttime. And what I want to talk about is what happens after dark as opposed to what happens before dark. Really, for the last 45 years, night fishing in the summer has been one of my favorite things to do, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time out on the lake at night into the early morning hours, sometimes to the detriment of my sleep and everything
Right.
else, but it's a magical time to be on the water out there, you know, after 11, 12.
Oh, you're talking late night right there. Okay, so you said something that caught my attention. You said fish haven't even begun to transition for those guys fishing those tournaments. So let's talk a little bit about what the fish are doing. And we're talking bass specifically, what they're doing at that latter point of the evening, and then as it gets dark, that transition period. What is that all about?
Well, a lot of times in the late evening, you know, during the day in the summer, especially on our highland reservoirs with bluebacks in them now, they're schooled up out on offshore brush and so forth. But when it gets to the evening, 5, 6, 7, those schools start to break up, and they disappear from, for the most part, off of that, how we've been catching them all day in the summer. But in the evening, they transition. Now, there's some mystery to where they go and how they disappear and so forth, and I couldn't give you a blow-by-blow explanation of exactly where they go and how they hide and how they get adjusted to the change in light and all that. I just know they do, because you can be out there and catch 40 or 50 during the daytime, and in the evening it starts to tail off quite sharply, and you quit seeing those big schools out on those offshore places, and they disappear, and you have to change your tactics at that time. But for purposes of this discussion, we're kind of advancing on to when it turns dark. And really in the summer, sometimes it's 9:30 before it really starts to get dark, and really probably it's 11 o'clock or so before I think the fish have made a good solid transition to the nighttime places and behaviors.
Right. So tell me about some of the places that you're finding fish at night.
It can be a lot, you know. What I'm going to focus on mostly is spotted bass.
Okay,
you know,
for
largemouth. I've caught them out in the same places before, but I don't catch a lot of largemouth, and I know that some of the big largemouth are probably around a little shallower than what I'm fishing. But probably the most important thing I would say about this whole discussion as to where to fish, it's traditional structure fishing. And if you don't know what that doesn't just mean fishing brush piles or fishing stumps or whatever. It has more to do with the contour of the bottom.
Okay.
In traditional structure fishing, you want to find the flattest places on the lake and where they begin to drop off sharply.
Okay.
And it has to be within the depth range that the fish are using. So it's not just if there's a flat out in 40 feet and it drops to 60, that's out of play. What we're talking about and what you ought to be really concentrating on is that 12 to 24 foot range.
Okay.
Now, you can take issue with a foot here or there
For
or
sure.
two, but for me, it means 12 to 24 feet. And I want to find those contours that are the flattest, and then they break off sharply, that fall within that range. I don't care if it's a 12-foot point and the end of it out at 12 foot drops off into 18, or if it's a flat or a point or a hump that tops out at 18 feet and it drops off. And it can even be 22 or 24 feet and drop off.
Right.
But that range of 12 to 24 is my target area. And for people that have, on top of that, the most important thing, tool that I have helping me to identify these areas, and the thing that I use most at night, is good mapping.
Mm.
I could turn all the sonar off. I don't even care about it. But in my case, I use Lake Master mapping. It's 1 foot contours. It's got a feature where you can highlight a certain depth range. And at night, I'm going to have that green highlight on my maps from 12 to 24 feet. And that's where I'm going to be limiting my search to around the whole lake, whether it's points that run out, whether it's humps, whether it's channel edges, whatever it is, that's the range to key on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And and what we're talking about here is probabilities. I can tell you, I kind of operate by rules that I use. They're not really rules, they're just probabilities. And when I say, if you're not fishing that range, you're not going to catch any, well, anybody can take exception to that, because there's exceptions to everything.
Absolutely.
I'm just talking about the high probability of having success.
And that's based upon 45 years of being on the water doing this. I get that. Now, the sharp drop-off, the fish during the day, are they deeper on that brush and moving up on this, or are they shallow moving out on this? I'm kind of curious how you got to that range.
During the daytime, in the summer, I'm looking for brush piles and other structure that ideally, with blueback in the lake, and we're talking Allatoona, but it's true on other lakes too, but that's where I spend most of my time. But I like the brush and stuff that sticks up within 10 to 15 feet of the surface.
Okay.
When they get schooled on that, they're there, they're looking up, they're ready to feed when they're schooled out there in the daytime, and that's why they come up and hit top water and
Yes.
and a lot of other lures that you can use. But at night, they're not positioned like that. At night, we can talk about live scope, and I do use live scope at night, but I don't look for fish at all. The fish you see are going to be hybrids and other fish that are up, and they look really good, but those are not the ones you're catching. These fish that you're going to catch, especially the bigger spotted bass, are going to be on bottom.
Okay.
And I know that I didn't catch them because of live scope, but I've seen a lot of them hit on live scope. And all of them, you can be rolling a spinnerbait out over 18 feet and hit a little rocky rubble before it drops off. And as it clears, you can see one come out of nowhere. Well, he's coming off bottom.
Okay.
And when that spinnerbait comes over, he comes up and he gets it. And live scope didn't help me catch it, but it may have helped me target that rock pile. So I'm only looking for structure, and it helps direct the cast and helps you to be a little more efficient, but not looking at fish at all.
That's pretty interesting, because I have a lot of guys come in the shop, and one question I get all the time is, why do we don't throw top water at night? But basically, your experience is saying the majority of those fish, I mean, you might can catch one here and there, but the majority of them, they're gonna be close to the bottom, and that's just because it's dark. That's more comfortable for them, or?
Well, that's the way I'm going to fish. Now, there's a population of fish that stay shallow, and you can use stuff like chatterbaits and buzz baits and lighter spinner baits like half-ounce spinner baits, and cast up on rocky outcroppings and fish less than 10 feet if you want to.
Yeah.
And you can probably catch some fish, and you can certainly catch a big fish along. But basically, most of my success in catching big spotted bass is moving on out a little bit and targeting the offshore stuff and getting off the bank.
Okay.
And of course you're looking for stuff like brush piles, rock piles, stumps. That just helps to pull those fish. They're cover oriented just like they are in the daytime.
Right.
At nighttime, even though I think they roam a little bit more sometimes and in cover of darkness. But basically the fish I'm targeting, and the bigger fish, they're out on structure. I'm going to fish offshore, and I'm going to be targeting the contour that we just talked about.
Right.
And I'm looking for stumps, brush, rocks, natural stuff or man-made stuff that's situated in that 12 to 24 foot area. And I think it's best when it approaches a sharp drop in the contour. But you can be on a flat or a long featureless point and put a brush pile out on it or a rock, something out there, and you can catch fish on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna pull. It's cover.
Right.
And some fish will get around it. But most of the natural stuff, a lot of times if you look at points that run out, a lot of times there'll be a little rise, a small rise or some rubble or rock before it actually goes into the channel or the ditch or makes a significant change in contour.
Yeah.
And those are the key spots.
Okay. So, and I'm, again, you're the expert, I'm not. But what I'm hearing is that at night, well, let me ask you this. Let me change that and ask this question. Spotted bass during the day are notoriously aggressive. Notoriously will come up out of 35, 40 feet of a brush pile to hit topwater, roam chasing bluebacks. In your experience at night, they're still an aggressive fish, but they're more, I guess, in a single location. You said they may roam, but maybe not as much during the day as far as chasing bait.
Yeah, I don't think they're out chasing bait by and large.
Okay.
Now there's differences, lighted areas, and
right.
There's all kind of other variables, but generally at night they're going to position in ambush points, and they're going to react to whatever prey or lure comes around them. And,
yeah. And they probably utilize their lateral line a lot more at night than they do during the day.
Now I have seen fish shoot up from 10 feet or even more to hit a lure at night since I've had live scope, but that's the exception versus the rule. I mean, they can, even if you if you've got a brush pile out in 25 feet and you reeled a spinner bait 10 feet under the surface, I think they know it, and if they want to
get it, they'll get it.
They want to come up, they can get it. But typically, I want to get it a lot. I think their strike zone is a lot smaller than that.
And that might have
normally.
been the way I should ask that question. Does the strike zone shrink at night? And so you kind of answered that. And I think before we even get into the baits, it's kind of understanding that, especially with spotted bass, which we have in every lake pretty much here in North Georgia, understanding their attitudes, their habits. And so you kind of answered that by saying, this is how they are during the day. At night, smaller strike zone, still same ambush creature that they are, but just kind of compacted a lot.
I think it's, to me, in some ways, it's a lot like fishing in muddy water, whether it's shallow or well, it's going to be shallow in the winter if you're catching them in really stained water. They like to get next to hard cover and they bite. But in the summer, I think all that goes, it just shifts a lot deeper. Now, they still got limited visibility and they feel safer at night, but they still want to get next to cover. And that's why it's so effective to, whether it's a single rock or a rock pile or a brush pile or a stump, a single stump out on a relatively featureless edge of a bank, that one little bit of cover can draw a good fish or two.
Right, that sweet
night.
spot.
Yeah.
So, and another question before we get on to the baits is about bait itself. So, a lot of our lakes have blueback herring. They definitely have threadfin, gizzard, and all that. We know that bluebacks are notoriously roaming all over the place. In your experience, what does the bait actually do at night?
Well, I do see bait at various places. Most of the time I don't see big balls of bait like I might other times, but
are they more structural?
But I think that a lot of bait settles, it's different around lights and marinas and stuff, but I think a lot of the bait settles down to bottom at night.
Okay.
When you're not seeing it. It can happen even in the daytime when you go out on a lake where you've been catching them, and this day you go out, you think, goodness, where's the bait? Well, they haven't evaporated. They're in there. But I think they can sink down and really blend to bottom too. But on the case of bluebacks, some people listening to this may laugh or they may know more about it than I do, but my experience over the years is you can still catch these spots at night fishing the way we fished for a lot of years, but overall bluebacks hurt the night bite a little bit.
Really?
I think that the night bite, even though I still like to do it, I enjoy going to Lanier occasionally and catching some good fish at night, but I don't think it's as good as it was a few years ago. And I think I've seen a drop in the night bite at some different lakes, the after dark bite, that have bluebacks and alewives in them.
You got any guess as to why? Or
I don't know. It changes the habits of the fish so much in the daytime. I mean, last summer we were catching 40 to 80 fish a day at Allatoona in the daytime in the summer, and that's probably the first time in 40 years that I really made much of any attempt to even fish in the daytime down there. Although you could always catch some, but not like that.
Right.
So it changed the daytime bite, and
and
it'd be silly not to think that it hasn't changed the nighttime bite, I think.
Yeah.
And based on my unscientific experience, it just seems that way. And I could name a half a dozen lakes where I think I can see a difference in the night bite.
Yeah, and for somebody that's listening, you spend a lot of time on Lake Allatoona, and the bluebacks are in Allatoona, but it is, considering the age of the lake, a relatively new thing for the lake. So we're talking the last 10 years or less.
Probably less than that. I mean, I heard rumors of it maybe 5 years ago, but I didn't really see it until a little later than that.
Okay, so this is something you're actually watching, though, in real time.
Yeah.
Kind of watching the effect of the blueback herring on the spotted bass on Allatoona.
Now, I'd love to discuss with some of the guys that think they have a good idea what that difference is, but I've talked about that to quite a few people that are experienced, and they say, it does kind of seem that way. So,
yeah,
you might get some great fishermen out there that say, "No, I can't see any difference." That's
yeah.
I don't
But
believe that.
in your eyes, that's what you're saying.
That's what I believe, and I'm just going by my experience.
Yeah. And sometimes that's absolutely the best way to go by. I mean, it's not like you only got a couple years experience. You've been on the water for a long time. I'm not calling you old or nothing like that, but you've been on the water
Well,
a hot
I just had
minute.
a birthday a couple of days ago, and I'm one more notch.
One more trip around the sun.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start off with, we're going to go for that night bite. We're gonna let the sun get on down, kind of start getting into that prime time that you're talking about. Does the equipment, as far as the rod and reels, change that you're using at night compared to during the day?
Well, it does for me. Now, I realize, and for many years, now I've been doing fishing it the way I really like to fish it for quite a few years now, but starting 40 years ago, just about everybody fished a plastic worm at night. And it was very effective, and you could catch a lot of fish, and I'm sure that it's still that way, although after dark, I kind of shy away from fishing a worm, or even a jig can be real.
You got one down here somewhere,
I got one
don't you?
somewhere in this mess of stuff. Well,
that's a bladed
whether
jig.
I do or not, I thought I did, but a jig can be effective, a worm can be effective, but sometimes to my detriment, I'm going to pick up a 3/4 or 1 ounce spinner bait, and I'm going to live and die with it.
Live and die by the
because
spinner bait.
I just like it that much.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes I can tell that they just don't want to bite it, and I'm forced to do other things, but
That's
I
what you're
really
going
don't
with.
want to even then.
Right.
One of my buddies, he jokingly says this, but it's probably too close to the truth. I'd rather cast and wind this spinner bait through the right places and not catch them as to change to a worm or a jig. But now that won't win you any tournaments,
Right.
having that mindset.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's just what I like to do, and it has put tons of fish in my boat, and I really think that's the way
to go right there.
to go. And I think for whatever reason, whether it's pressure or whatever, maybe it's not nearly as effective as it once was, but it's still pretty effective.
Still pretty effective. We're going to talk about that spinner bait, but I got one more question on the worm in the jig, and this is just because being in the shop, you hear guys talk, and I think a lot of guys that like to throw that plastic worm, where during the daytime they may throw a finesse style or a trick worm style bait, you hear them talking about at night going to the larger worms like the old monster, just your 9, 10, 12-inch worms of that sort. Is that something that you've seen? Does it make a difference, the size of the worm? If you throw one in.
I've never gone to that extent as far as a 10-inch or 12-inch worm at night on Lake Allatoona. I'm not saying that people haven't been successful doing it, but I like to go a little bigger. I don't even know what that worm is there, but that's a little thicker worm. It's got a curly tail. This is an old worm, a core worm from probably 25 years ago or more. But
you still got them.
Little curly tails.
You think that curly tail helps to impart a little bit of action?
It gives a little bit of vibration,
little bit, yeah.
Extra. Fishco came out with a whole line of curly tail worms. They're the only manufacturer I know that's really got an old style curly tail worm.
Yeah,
now.
it's not
But-
popular
but,
anymore. It's coming back though, from what I hear.
But I like a little bigger worm, but I don't go to. We're still fishing for spotted bass, and
Yeah, that was my next question. Does it make a difference between a spot and a largemouth lake?
probably an 8-inch would be about as far as I feel comfortable going with, but that's just me.
Texas rig or shaky head?
Well, I like a Texas rig. You know, it kind of sounds pretty old-fashioned now, but there's a technique back 25 or 30 years ago called glass and brass, and it was a brass sinker and a glass bead. Well, I don't use any brass sinkers, but tungsten, I still like to put a glass bead on a Texas rig more than I like to fish a shaky head at night.
Okay.
But you can shake it and it will tap and makes a little extra noise.
Just something different.
I'm not saying it's earth shaking, but it's just something a little extra that you can do. Put a little extra sound there.
Yeah.
Although I don't think they have to have it. They can feel that worm. I've caught plenty on a shaky head at night fishing. I like to go to dark. You know, I was listening to Tim Hancock, and who I've got a lot of respect for, and he's had a lot of great experiences and caught a lot of big bass. You know, he's not much of a believer in dark colors and so forth because the shad don't change colors at night. But I'm not to say he doesn't know what he's talking about, because I know that he does. But I am a believer in dark colors at night just because it presents a stronger silhouette in the darkness, and that's why everything I've got here is dark.
Yeah.
Now,
I was going to bring that question up at some point, but
you know, I do know people that's caught plenty of fish at night on a white spinnerbait and so forth, but and during the full moon, it's pretty bright out there. So
it is, yeah.
I think you could get away with a lot of colors, and I think the sound's probably more important than the color. But you know, old habits are hard to break sometimes, and I stick with the dark colors. You know, I haven't tried to reinvent the wheel, and all of us fishing wise are standing on the shoulders of those that came before us.
Absolutely.
And a lot of those guys didn't have the benefit of all the great electronics, and they just knew what they had learned, and somewhere along the line they believed in these dark colors, and I'm gonna
they sell too.
follow them.
Yeah, if you look at what sells in a store for spinnerbaits in the summer, definitely, especially for night, definitely the dark colors and all that.
But I don't really care. People ask me what color should it be. This should it have a little purple in it? This, I don't really care. I like purple ones, blue ones, black ones, red ones, anything that's a strong color.
Right.
I just think it's the silhouette that.
Okay. Makes sense.
But it's more sound than anything.
Yeah. So, I'm holding this one up, and of course, we all know the big Colorado blade.
Well, the big Colorado, but now that
this one's a little different.
This is a blade that I've been working with for a long time, and it looks like an Indiana, but it is a modified or hybrid Indiana blade. And there is a difference in blades at night. That blade is a little more subtle and a little faster vibration than your typical Colorado. But now I usually have both tied on, and there's some nights that they prefer that. I think it's a little more subtle, but there's some nights where the Colorado can beat that. But overall, that's my
you like
favorite.
this. So basically, what I'm looking at though is you took an Indiana and a Colorado, and gave birth to this. Now, when would you use this? The subtleness. When would that actually make a difference?
Well, that's my favorite one, and I always start with that. If I'm not, a lot of times if there's two of us in the boat, somebody may be throwing a Colorado, and they may be catching them and I'm not.
Yeah.
And I'm slow, but not that slow.
Right.
So I get the message. But I've seen it just the other way around too.
Yeah, for sure.
And, with all the pressure we have on our lakes and so forth, I think this blade is the right combination. But now, it's just like daytime. Sometimes fish just bite better. They're more aggressive at certain times. And I think when they are, that Colorado blade is a killer. But when it's less than that, I think that blade, that Indiana hybrid blade there is called a rumbler blade.
Rumbler
now.
blade?
But,
yeah.
I think it's my favorite all time.
Okay.
deal.
Well, what made you kind of think about combining the two?
Well, not so much as I discovered anything. The first spinnerbaits I started working with back in the 80s, you couldn't even really buy a 3/4 or 1 ounce spinnerbait on the shelf anywhere at that time that I knew about. And there was some guys at Lanier that were fishing spinnerbaits at night, and they didn't have any 3/4. They had a fella in Cornelia that made these 5/8 ounce spinnerbaits.
Okay.
And the ones they used had a tiny collar. It was a double bladed. It was a tiny, about the smallest Colorado blade you could get for the little blade, and it had an Indiana behind it.
Okay.
And that was the first hint I got at that, and I got to using that bait and having some success. And I was in Tennessee some few years after that, and I found these 3/4 ounce spinnerbait bodies. So I bought them, and I'd seen the different blades, Pickens and a bunch of others, but I saw this type blade in Tennessee, and I hacked up a bunch of spinnerbaits and put them together, and
It worked.
Had unbelievable success with it.
Yeah.
Really. My buddy who had fished with me a lot, he had been using the old 5/8s, and the first time I had those, I didn't tell him I had a different one. And that particular night, I was catching fish after fish, and he finally got down and looked. He said, "Hey, you're not even using our spinnerbait."
That's right. He caught you.
I said, "No, this is a different one, and give me one of those." He says.
Smart man.
And so we never used any 5/8s after that. We went to 3/4 and even some 1 ounce blades, and it was just easier and not quite so tedious to fish it deep. And
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Tim Hancock. He loves a heavy spinnerbait.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got some even heavier than an ounce, you know.
Right.
I've had that conversation with him, and that's in the daytime, too. He just loves a heavy spinnerbait. What I'm curious is, you were talking about that magical section from 12 to 24, and you're going to target it with the spinnerbait.
With the spinnerbait.
How are you approaching that section? Are you paralleling it, or are you casting to the bank? What are we doing?
I'm going to get off out on the deep side of this stuff, whether it's a hump or a long point or a flat. I'm going to get off of it to the deep side. I'm going to cast this spinnerbait typically as far as I can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let it sink all the way to the bottom, and when it quits falling and hits the bottom, I'm going to start slow rolling it, and I'm going to try to tick every root, rock, whatever it is on bottom. It's a fine line. I don't want to hang up.
Right.
But I want to keep it as close to bottom and bumping stuff as much as I can. Now, when you hit a brush pile that sticks up 4, 5, 6, 7 feet, you gotta you got to get a feel for when your line is over something and you know you're about to come up on that, because you've got to speed it up a little bit to climb over that stuff. If you just keep your same old retrieve, you're going to be hung up and you're going to be going in there and trying to get it loose. So whether it's rock or brush that sticks up, you got to speed it up just a little bit to keep it from hanging up. But otherwise you want it to be right in the middle of that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a little learning curve if you haven't done it.
Right. Well, when you say feel the line, what exactly are we feeling?
Well, if you cast over a big brush pile, even if you don't know it's there, and you let that bait sink on the other side of it, if you're really paying attention and begin to get a feel of what's happening, you're going to feel that line is over something. It's not a straight pull to that spinnerbait.
Okay.
You're going to sense that, yeah, I'm over something, and I'm going to have to clear that, so I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. But as soon as I clear that, I'm either going to kill it or I'm going to slow way down, because I want that thing to come up over there. A lot of times you get to that top limb and you feel that resistance. I just give it a quick little pop and it makes that spinnerbait hop over, and when it starts down,
just something
good things can happen.
Yeah, but experience, basically. You just got to learn to do that. And okay, that makes sense. I've never heard anybody basically say feel the line the way you were talking about with the brush pile, but that makes sense. Now, on the construction of these spinnerbaits that you got, the couple that I picked up, I believe they're Picassos. Are they?
Those are.
They're Picassos. It seems to me like we got a very thin wire, or is this a thicker wire? It just seems like with this blade.
035 is what I like. Now, there's a lot of other folks that make really good spinnerbaits and night spinnerbaits that work really well. And I used to have a friend that made them, and he was always sensitive to spinnerbaits breaking and getting bent up. So he set out to make one that was indestructible, and it had wire about twice as big as this, and it was indestructible, but I don't think it caught as many fish.
Right. So that wire helps to give out that vibration.
The thinner the wire, the more vibration. As this blade turns, the more it shakes this, and you're
just giving out all kinds of stuff.
Gets that good vibration. Now, there's a fine line to all that, like everything else. You can't go to the ridiculous, but 035. There's some with 032 and then some with 040, and those all work, but I guess 35 is probably about the sweet spot for me.
Yeah. I noticed you were talking about that one earlier when you said you noticed the guy had a small Colorado and then the Indiana. How come we don't see a lot of two-blade setups these days? It seems like a lot I see are just single blades. Well,
I think a two-blade setup typically puts out it's more a tendency towards sight than I believe. It's just like, I like in the daytime I love a double willow spinnerbait, and but at night, and you also, the more blades you get, the more lift you get, and that's something I'm fighting at night. I don't want any more lift than I have to have. Because I want to keep that thing. I'm trying to fish this spinnerbait deep, and so if it has too much lift or whatever, I'm not saying a two-blade won't work, but I think you get interference between the two, and it doesn't put out as clear a signature sound as a single blade can, a thump.
That makes sense. Now, I noticed in all these you've got a double-tailed grub-style bait for a trailer.
Yeah.
Personal preference, and if so, why?
Well, there again, I guess I copied some guys from way back when.
Yeah.
And had great success with it. And you could probably put a lot of different trailers on, or maybe not even run a trailer, but I think it balances it out really well, and I think that when they do bite, they get it's not just hard
Got something to
lead
grab to.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's got a little texture there to it, and it just gives it bulk.
Helps
which
with that
is
profile.
big with
Yeah.
for fish. So I've tried different things, but really, if I don't have that double tail trailer with me, I kind of feel like I'm not armed to the fullest.
I got you. Do you ever run a trailer hook?
I really don't. There might be one exception. If I'm fishing shallower, say less than 10 feet, and I'm using a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait and I'm targeting rocks and stuff, I might put a trailer hook on there. But when I'm fishing deep in brush and stumps and whatever,
Yeah.
no, it's more trouble than it's worth. I haven't ever felt the need to really do that. It's not like I miss a whole lot of fish or whatever. I think on nights where they might just barely bump it and you can't hardly get a bite except one might bump it every once in a while, I don't think a trailer hook's that big of a help.
Okay,
really.
Makes sense. Now, what are we throwing these on? Now, you're talking 3/4 and 1 ounce spinner baits.
It's either going to be 17 or 20 pound test line. There again, I know some great fishermen, some of the best. They don't use black lights and so forth. They don't need it, but I guess I've always enjoyed fishing with black lights, so I've got black lights. And
Yeah, I noticed that right there.
Sunline makes a fluorocarbon that is fluorescent, and you can see it really well with the black lights. And
Let's see that.
and and of course, there's mono that Stren and P-line, they make fluorescent lines that will work, but fluoro, I kind of had to get used to using fluoro, because after using those other monos for so many years, it seemed like as soon as I switched to fluoro, I was getting hung up a lot more, and I was. I mean, fluoro helps keep it down.
Yeah.
And so having a good fluoro that's fluorescent, when you're fishing at night and it's dark out there on the darkest of nights, sometimes if the wind's blowing, you can kind of get out of position. You may think you've cast this way and you're reeling with your bait like it's coming straight this way, but with the wind and movement, your line might be over there.
Just off
and
enough.
You don't get a straight pull. Now, guys that are experienced and don't use black lights and don't need it, that do well, they've learned to do it regardless. But most people enjoy fishing with the black lights. A lot of times you can see the strike a nanosecond before you feel it.
Yeah.
The line jumps. Kind of where everybody's not so experienced that they really are in control of throwing it just where they want to, or even know where it lands.
I can speak to that.
And
yeah.
That's a great tool to help
Black light.
with that. And I don't know, it's probably not as popular as it once was, but
you like it.
I don't like fishing without it.
Yeah.
Would I have to have it? No, I could get used to it pretty quick, but it's I think it's an effective tool.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's good
and
to
I
know.
like and use 17 or 20 pound line.
What kind of rod?
Well, I'll a 7 foot to a 7.6 rod is pretty good. I've kind of settled. My favorite rods are 7 foot 3 inch heavy action. Of course, there's such differences between manufacturers. Some people's medium heavy
Yes.
might be somebody else is heavy, and somebody else is heavy ought to really be a medium heavy. So
That's right.
It not the heaviest of rods on a bait like a spinner bait and a chatter bait. You want to have a little bit of tip. It's more sensitive, and there's even lines of rod for reaction baits that are softer and so forth. Now, I don't want a soft rod, but some of my favorite ones are Dobbin 734. I've even had Powell 734s. That's a 7.3 4-power rod. They call them heavy.
But
they're not the heaviest of heavies, but because they have a little bit of tip. I've used the G. Loomis 894, which is a 7.5, and it's actually a 893. It's a 3-power. For them, I guess that's medium heavy, but it's just a hair on the light side. But a lot of different rods will work. I wouldn't really get hung up on it. I've used iRod 734. They just happen to have the same numbering system, but it's basically a 7'3" rod with a medium heavy to heavy, somewhere in that range, and that allows you to throw 3/4 or 1 ounce spinner bait. You can launch it way out there, and even if you've thrown it 100 feet and one gets it, when you rear back on it, you can hook him.
You got him. I got it. Now, like you're saying, you got to find the rod that you like. Same probably with the reel, but is there a gear ratio that you would recommend?
Yeah, I've experimented some with that, because it's a fine line of reeling that thing and keeping it close to bottom and bumping here and there and hanging up. And people that have just start to do it, there's a learning curve, because if you're getting hung up every other cast and having to go get it, you're messing up an area pretty much. But I like the 6.4.
Okay.
I probably like that ratio for everything better than anything else. I've got 5-to-1s, I've got 7-to-1s, I've got 8-to-1s, and I've got even a 10-to-1. But 6.4-to-1 is and even from brand to brand, there's a little bit of difference in the torque and the amount of line that's retrieved with each turn, just because of spool size and so forth. But in the Shimano line, the 6.4 is perfect to me. Now, I've known people that say, I like the 5-to-1 because I can really work it, and but whatever it is, you get used to it, and I guess some people can throw a 7-to-1 and do exactly the same thing I do, but it seems like when I get a 7-to-1, I'm just on the verge of reeling it too fast, and I feel like there's too much resistance when that gear ratio. But it's what you're used to mainly, and a guy that uses 7-to-1, he probably doesn't think a thing about it. But I like 6.4.
But you like 6. Well, and that's good, solid advice right there.
And you can tell, like if you have a swivel that starts, one of the biggest things that happens to any of these spinner baits, after you've caught a few, the wire can break, but there's not much to wear out here except that swivel. And if you're really in tune with what's happening, you can, when you really slow that bait down, if this thing has a little catch in it, you can tell that a spinner bait doesn't have the proper resistance at the speed you're winding.
Right.
And you can pull that thing in and flick it, it's going to turn like crazy. But on some of these, and probably all these work, but if you get a blade like this and you touch it and it starts turning like that and then it grabs,
right,
it's time to change the swivel on that blade. Because when you slow that thing down, if it has that little catch in it, I'm telling you, it won't work. Now, yeah, you lift it up or reel it faster. Oh, yeah, I can feel it. It starts working again. But it's not how it works when you're reeling it fast or lifting up on it. It's how the blade works when you are slowing it down to its slowest. Because if it has a little hang on it, I've experienced this for years, the fish just won't bite that as well.
Okay.
I've been lazy and not changed it, and wonder why I started not getting bit, and I bring it in and it's got that little catch in it. I take it off, put another one on, and it's almost like that. I start getting bites again.
Right.
And I'm thinking, man, that's why in my boat you'll see all kind of blades chopped off these things, because I am not going to use a spinnerbait where the blade is not turning freely like it's supposed to. And most nights, most spinnerbaits won't last a night of fishing.
Right.
I mean, they just won't.
Now, when you say won't last the night, you're talking about because of the quality of the swivel?
Because of the swivel.
Yeah. For those that are thinking about maybe I need to, replace mine, is there a specific brand of swivel you recommend, or a couple of them?
Not really. I mean, in my lifetime, Sampo's supposed to be the gold standard, but I don't know that it is or not, because I've gotten some Worth and other ones that I think one of the biggest things is sometimes they don't put as big a swivel on them as they could. These swivels are like rated by weight or whatever.
Right.
And you can put a little swivel on any bait and it's going to work right off, but how long is it going to work? So if I can, I usually try to get a bigger swivel, but
okay, no, that makes sense.
But now I don't know enough about swivels. A lot of them that I've gotten, I just liked when you flick one that it'll just keep going and going and going, and then it always comes to a smooth stop. But if you fish much at night and you check your blades, you're going to find that they won't do that. They will go, and when they get to a certain speed, slowing down,
something
stop.
In that swivel,
it stops.
Has a catch, yeah.
And that's no good. Now that's getting really in the weeds and in the fine point of it, but
it's something a lot of people don't.
It's true.
Yeah.
There is no doubt. There's no doubt in the world that it's true. I mean, I've just seen it too much.
I don't think a lot of people think about checking their swivels.
If you fish at night with a single blade deal like that,
pay attention to the swivel.
And like I said, you can take any. It's not like they're going to just completely lock up, because you can speed them up. They'll say, yeah, it's thumping again, or you lift it up and you can feel it. But they'll all do that.
Yeah.
It's what happens when you really slow it down.
The least amount of resistance possible.
And once you've fished a spinnerbait a lot at night and slow rolled it, you can even tell that the resistance from that blade turning freely and catching water is different.
Something's
up.
You
start feeling that, you better check it out.
Okay, now that's great.
Another thing that happens, and I haven't been smart enough to solve this, but you can even tell when you cast these spinnerbaits and they start feeling a little different. You better reel it in and check where you've tied this thing. It can wrap around 2 or 3 times, and you're not even pulling from the center point then.
Right, yes.
Your line's wrapped around, and I mean, you can develop a feel so that you can even tell that when it's not right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but that's something that happens quite a lot. Sometimes when you drop a spinnerbait on the free fall, it can wrap that line around there, and sometimes that's because this blade's not spinning free too.
Okay, well that's some good juice right there. Now let me ask you this: what's the biggest mistake people make at night with spinnerbaits that you've seen?
Well,
or bad habits they may have.
For most people, for many years, is they thought of a spinnerbait as a shallow water deal, and they wouldn't think about going out to brush piles and stumps that they would throw a jig or a worm on out in 20 feet of water, throwing a spinnerbait on it,
Right.
and working it on bottom. But I guess if I had to just say the most simple common mistake is one of two things: either they're fishing it too fast,
Okay.
and they're never hanging up, but they're just got a speed they're going, and it's not really staying where it needs to be, or they're staying hung up all the time.
Right.
They
Because
don't-
they're not
they-
feeling
they
coming across
haven't
that.
developed the feel of how to negotiate whatever terrain or bottom.
Yeah.
Because you can throw it and wind it fast enough and it'll never hang up. But there's a fine line between reeling at the speed to where you're bumping and staying close to bottom, but avoiding most of the hang-ups.
Yeah.
Now, I get hung up myself. I'm
Yeah,
not
for sure.
saying that I can do it so well I never hang up, but because I do. But it's just a feel you develop on how to.
Just experience. You just gotta do it.
And it's not rocket science, and it doesn't take. Some people get it pretty quick, and
Yeah.
some don't.
Trust me, I'm one of those that takes a little while. Now, I know we got a couple other baits, but I want to ask you this because I don't see it with some of these you brought. Nighttime crankbaits. Now, I know a lot of guys, especially on Lanier, will throw a big, deep diving crankbait. Generally, it's a darker color. You black and blues, black and reds, big bill, and they're grinding it, basically doing the same thing you're talking about, grinding it into the bottom. I'm just curious as to why I don't see one right here with you.
Not my thing.
Okay.
Now, I realize there's fish caught on it.
I really thought you'd bring one.
I get hung up sometimes, and I pull big crankbaits out with this spinnerbait.
Yeah.
I see them, the big, the DD22s, the Spro, Little Johns or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I see them out there, and I have thrown one at night before, but now I'm talking about you have to develop a feel for getting this spinnerbait through there. Well, you better develop a feel for getting that crankbait through there. You're going
Right.
to be minus a few
Yes.
every time you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I would just say, for me, it's just too tedious working that
Okay.
thing, and I just like the positive feel of that spinnerbait. And when they hit it,
Yeah.
they knock it. And
Yes. That's fair
just
enough.
like it better.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything. There'll be guys out there that say, "Well, man, if he knew what I caught on this crankbait, he'd be throwing one too," and maybe I would, but
Yeah.
I'm just going to stick to what I know.
Fair enough. I was just curious, honestly, when I knew you were coming up.
Yeah, I've done it. I've tried it. I've caught some on it. Even smaller crankbaits, fishing shallow.
But you just like
I
the
just, I just
spinnerbait.
like a spinnerbait much better.
Okay, no, fair enough. I was just like I said. I knew you were coming. I knew you were bringing a few things. I just
And
expected
there's some
it.
guys that know what they're doing that can take that crankbait and catch
Yeah.
them. I
Just
guarantee it.
Bill Payne just don't like it.
That's not my thing.
Not your thing. Okay, fair enough. So I see a chatterbait and I see a buzzbait. So let's hit the chatterbait right there. Bladed jig for those that don't want to call it chatterbait. When would you throw that?
Well, if I'm fishing shallow, if I want to go up shallow where I would throw a half-ounce spinnerbait, or I want to get on the bank, some shallow rock,
Okay.
I'm gonna. It's not something that I'm gonna get out deep with. I know they make 3/4 ounce ones, ounce and a quarter ones, and
Right.
so forth. But if I feel like I need to get up shallow, or I want to cover some shallow bank, whether it may be that it's October in the night or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, that's when I find a lot more fish shallow up on the rocks. And it's just something that I use.
Yeah.
shallow in the rocks.
So do you feel like, though, I mean, I'm just going to ask this question. Why wouldn't you just use a shallow running spinnerbait?
Well, just same thing within a day, like it is in the daytime.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just like a chatterbait.
Like a chatterbait.
Better than a spinnerbait. You know, that same thing happens in the daytime.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Right.
And it may be the same difference that I'm talking about between this blade and a Colorado blade.
Yeah.
It's a little more.
But you're going to start
different vibration.
Right. But you're going to start off with a chatterbait if you're going shallow.
Not necessarily. It's just going to be something.
I
may have a half-ounce spinnerbait on, but
right.
But
just a different option.
Just something different, little different vibration, different sound. Just something different. You know, I know you take the spinnerbait or the buzz baits. You know, I'm really playing when I do stuff like this.
Okay.
Because by and large, it's not a high percentage deal at all.
The buzz bait.
Yeah, but
can catch them, of course.
It can, and I've known of some big ones to be caught on it. And,
yeah.
But it's when I'm really the top water bite at night generally is not high percentage.
Okay.
At all.
Yeah.
I mean, even though I've caught them on red fins, I've caught some on at night, but and there might be a night that's a way to win a tournament, and I probably won't even know it. But this is low percentage. Top water at night is low percentage.
Low percentage. When you're fishing shallow, I know you kind of mentioned rocks. When you're fishing at 12 to 24, you know exactly what you're looking for. Are there certain areas at night that are high percentage?
Oh, yeah.
And what are those areas?
Well, you get in that range, and where the best cover is.
Still cover.
Whether it's rock or whether it's stumps, and you get that stuff that's close to the break line, and for people that might not know what I'm talking about, it's where there's an abrupt change in the contour, and it's typically falling off. So if you've got a long transitioning point, it's coming out gentle, and it goes on out, and it gets to 15, and it runs out to 18, and then to 20, and then it drops down to 30 suddenly.
Yeah.
And right on the end, there's a little rock pile, or there's a little cluster of stumps, or somebody that knows what they're looking for has dropped a brush pile right on that flattest part before it breaks off.
Yeah.
That is the key kind of place that you want to put your bait.
And that can even occur shallower than 12 feet, right?
It could run out from a real shallow point. It runs out to 12 and then drops to 18 right there.
Yeah.
A lot of times there'll be some rock formation, some little bit of rubble on those places. That's just how the geography and geology works. When you've got these places that slope out and then they drop, they have a hard edge, or they would have been washed away long before or something.
Right.
So those are key hard spots on the bottom. Be the same thing on a hump that comes up. It may have a few stumps on it. It may have rock, but it was a ridge before the lake was formed.
Yeah.
It's got a little higher spot, and it's hard bottom, and it's got something on it, a brush pile, rock, some sort of cover, but then it immediately drops off on every side almost.
Yeah.
And those contour changes with flat, hard substances, brush piles, rocks, stumps, that's what you're going to key on.
Okay. How about boat docks and stuff at night? Something to key on? And if so, how would you attack them? It seems to me like you don't like them as much because we're going 12 to 24. You're looking for that.
I really don't. There are docks that have brush around them and so forth, And marina docks, that's a whole different subject, really.
Yeah.
But there are brush piles around marina docks up on the shallow ends. A lot of the guys have resorted to putting brush piles under cables, so they're just not found as easily, and
Yep.
they're kind of inconvenient to fish, but they're catching fish out of
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
but that's almost a whole different subject from anywhere you put a brush pile around a otherwise plain bottom can draw a fish or two. And,
Right.
And there's a lot of fish that live in marinas, so another deal, fishing lighted boat docks at night, that's a whole other different
Yes,
deal.
it is,
You
yeah.
know, you might fish it more like you'd fish in the daytime, kind of flukes, jerk baits,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess other things too. But even then, I like to, if I'm gonna fish a lighted boat dock is not something I've typically ever done very well with a spinnerbait on.
Right.
Now, a crankbait is a little different story. I
Mhm.
have caught them off lights with crankbaits, but I like to get kind of to the outer edge before that light starts to fade. I feel like a lot of times that's where the big fish are, and you can fish worms and other things like that.
Yeah. A little better ambush zone for the
Yeah,
fish
kinda
out there.
out there in the where the light kind of
Starts to blend
fade,
in and all. That makes sense. Now let me ask you this, and this is for me. Fishing tournaments or fishing with your buddies and all that. Has anybody ever pulled anything out to fish with at night and just in your mind you're going like, you are wasting your time? And maybe we can help somebody by not putting that bait on. Is it just something that's an absolute no-no at night?
Well,
for the most part.
I can't think of that happening, honestly, but any time in fishing, I've learned over the years. Example, I had this kid a few years ago that pulled this bait out, and I could tell he had not a clue of how you're supposed to work that bait.
Right.
He didn't have a clue. And I almost said, let me help you, buddy. I don't think you're going to catch them that way. Here's what you need to do. But I didn't. And I was glad I did. Because he started catching fish, and I thought,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
I might need to
Might be something to
incorporate,
that.
To some of my fishing with that.
Yeah.
But so I don't. Now I might have to bite my tongue, but I usually don't tell people you can't catch them that way.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking, like in your mind.
There is high percentage.
Yeah.
And low percentage, and it's all probability. And if you use your time in the highest probability places and ways to work your lure, you're going to have better results. There's no doubt. That's not to say you won't ever catch any doing whatever, but it's a game of percentages.
Yeah.
High percentage places, high percentage lures for that kind of place. Yesterday was a cloudy, rainy day, and the lake was up 3 or 4 feet over its banks, and I just had ideas that, man, fish ought to be hitting top water, fish ought to be doing this. I caught them on a fluke last week. Man, they're going to be up around all this shoreline cover. First hour, 0 fish.
Right.
I didn't want to, but I had to tie on the worm rigs, and then it's boom, 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 and we catch around 70 fish and have untold others pull off, jump off, whatever. I thought, gosh, how could you have a more active bite than that?
Yeah.
Even though I was not wanting to drag a worm around with these guys yesterday.
Right. But it was what was called for on that given day.
Evidently. I wouldn't have, I didn't see that happening, but it was.
Yeah. So a couple more things I want to touch base on. You mentioned earlier, you brought sonar up. You said, in conversations we've had in the past, including the last time you was on our live podcast, you mentioned, of course, sonar, live scope at night and what you use it for. You mentioned most of what you see is trash fish. So to take the live scope away from this, how about 2D and side scan? Make any difference at night, or are you just still going to continue to just look at the contour lines?
2D side scan is something that I've used prior. I've scoped the areas out. I've marked brush. I've marked stumps. I've marked rocks. I've looked at the contour by using the map to guide me. I've looked at what's there. If it's worthy, I've put a waypoint on it, and I come back and fish it.
Yeah.
Like I said, at night, all 2D confirms that the map is right. If the map says I'm sitting off the end of this long point and it says it drops from 20 to 36, and if I'm sitting out in 50,
correct,
I'm within casting distance, it's just confirming that the map's right or whatever. Although if I've idled and looked at this stuff, I already know that.
Yes.
So that's why I say I could simply turn everything off.
Okay.
But my mapping, and I'll say this. I mean, people use different brands and all this, and I've used Navionics, and I thought it was great because it was what we had. But this Lake Master mapping it's a cut above.
Okay.
Honestly, and it really. If I was trying to just, I didn't want anybody to know, I wouldn't even be saying it. But, it's not like I'm the only one that knows it. But you talk to enough people, even the guys that are sponsored by other companies. I listen to a lot of podcasts. They'll begrudgingly admit that, that Lake Master's pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it is what it is, right?
So it's accurate enough on the lakes we fish here in North Georgia that you could fish by that map. You could even go out on a lake if you'd never even been on it and use it if you knew what to target by looking at it.
It's that good.
It's that good, that accurate, and it's the most important thing you could have as far as electronics.
Okay.
Night fishing.
Night fishing.
And you might could it's old hat by now, but I know Live Scope gets and it is an amazing tool, but mapping is one of the biggest advancements that there ever was in fishing.
Yeah.
Being able to be on your front deck and know exactly where you are in relationship to the channel and the drop off and the high spot to make it in casting range.
Right.
It's so common, people, I guess they don't even think about it, but that's an amazing capability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think mapping and then, of course, spot lock. People just take it for granted it's out there now, but the ability to be able to stay in a given location and check things out. We're fishing at night. Accidents can happen at night.
Yeah.
So I actually, before I let you go, I want to talk about that a little bit too. What are some of the precautions you take when you're fishing at night, and what are some things you see other people do wrong?
Well, I wouldn't. I'd be misinforming people that don't know any better if I didn't say that fishing at night is more dangerous. Not so dangerous that you ought not to do it or you're going to get hurt if you do it. But you got to take proper precautions. And, the number one thing I'd say is always wear your life jacket at night when you're out fishing. They make these life jackets that are not so cumbersome and they're not too hot to wear in the summer. You ought to have your life jacket on. you ought to have a handheld spotlight in your boat within easy reach, even if you're up on the front deck.
Mm-hmm.
When you're fishing around lights like marinas, and say you're fishing a hump, but there's a marina in the background, people coming down lake, they can't see you.
Yeah.
I mean, it blends in. The more lights there are, like a marina or whatever, you get lost. You're camouflaged, and with the more boats that are on the water, sometimes accidents happen. That's why if you see a boat coming at you, don't assume he sees you. You ought to flash a light, not blind him. Just flash it on a time or two to let him know that
Here I
you're
am.
there.
Yeah.
But safety at night, you don't just start fishing. I know a lot of people in the past few years have run out, they bought boats. They really didn't have a really good background in fishing, but it's something they felt like they could learn, and they can.
Yeah.
But you don't want to jump out on the lake at night and buzz around if you don't have some experience. You need to know the water. It all looks different at night.
Yes.
You need to know. If I was beginning, I would kind of break the lake down. I would go and put in, and I would stay within a limited range of where I felt comfortable, that I knew what it was in the daytime. I've been around it, and I would gradually work my way out. I wouldn't rip up down the lake and say, well, there's shallow markers. I can run 60 miles an hour, and I'm going to go up to the other end of the lake. Probably not the best thing to do if you're not experienced.
Yeah.
Get with somebody that's experienced, a buddy that's done it, somebody that's got a lot more experience. Go with them a few times. Just be careful and learn your way and learn to be safe at night. I mean, I hate to say it, last summer I had people with me. There was a boat fishing about 300 yards from me, or 200 or 300 yards. I was fishing a bank, and I was probably from here to the roadway right out there off the bank making long casts. Well, this boat starts up. I think it's coming right at me. I made the mistake of not having my spotlight next to me. Before I could get it, he was right up on me, and before I knew it, he ran between me and the bank. And going into a cove. I mean, I was at the mouth of a cove.
Think he never saw you?
Well, I don't know what the deal was, because there were no lights behind me or anything. I don't know. Things can just happen at night that are unexplainable, and you just have to be careful.
Yeah.
And people that are used to fishing at night listening to this are saying, well, he's going overboard on that a little bit. But
I don't think so.
I'm not really talking to you. I'm talking to the people that don't have that experience and may not realize the perils of that at night. But safety has to be the number one issue at night. It has to be the main objective, not catching fish, being safe, and being able to go back home.
Yes.
And you just can't take that for granted, because when you do, that's when things happen.
100%. That's good advice, and I don't care how experienced somebody is. They need to hear that just as a refresher anyway.
Yeah.
All right, so we covered spinner baits. You talked a little bit about the chatterbait, the worm, the crankbait.
I want to say one more thing about safety.
Okay, absolutely.
And I know I'm an old man, and I don't run fast down the lake in the daytime or night. But these guys that are running 50, 60, 70 miles an hour at night on the lake, I got news for you. Not a good idea. I don't care how experienced you are and how long you've been doing it. Your vision is not that great at night. You don't see that far.
You just create greater opportunity.
Going 70 miles an hour at night in the water. I don't care who you are.
Yeah, no, hey, listen, I'm glad you stopped me and said that. So, again, sound advice. It doesn't matter how old you are. That's sound advice, and it doesn't matter how experienced you are. With that being said, like I said, we've covered quite a few things. Is there anything that we haven't covered, I haven't asked about, that you think definitely needs to be brought up? I know you had your list.
I had a little note here. I don't know. You know, it's not like, again, the most important thing I'll say is approximately 12 to 24 feet, classic structure fishing,
Right.
flattest bottom where it breaks to deep water.
Yeah.
That is key. Rainy nights versus clear nights, full moon versus dark moons. There's a lot of different subjects, and I guess I'll put all that is, you have to fish when you can go and when you're there.
Yeah. Well, what is better, full moon, new moon?
Well, for many years I would have told you that you can't go wrong in June, July, and August on the full moon. If you can't catch them then maybe you're in the wrong sport.
Right.
But, I'm glad I didn't say that too loud, because in recent years I've been on the lake on a full moon, and I thought I was in the twilight zone because the fish were not cooperating like
Right.
I thought. There were many years that I thought it's automatic on those nights.
Yeah.
Not so automatic all the time.
All the
maybe.
time.
I don't know whether it's fishing pressure or whatever, but then I read things and people swear by fishing on the dark
Yeah.
moon. The new moon. I rather have a little light myself.
You like
I think
that?
it makes it safer. It makes it easier. I've been out there when it's so dark that I thought, I couldn't see the hand in front of me, and
Yeah.
at least I had mapping to tell me that I wasn't
Right.
getting too close to the bank.
And your
'Cause I don't
black
know if
light.
I could have seen it.
Yeah.
But, typically, rainy nights, to me, and I know when guys are fishing in tournaments, they don't have a choice. They're there. They got to figure out a way to catch them. But the worst thing ever that happens is for a storm to come in with lightning and thunder and rain about 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And it just seems like the fish it disturbs them, and the bite, it takes it a while to recover.
I've experienced that. I've seen that.
I don't like that, but now, even so, that's high percentage thinking. But I had a fella a few years ago, it came one of those, it had been raining that afternoon, it stormed. I said, man, I tell you, I don't think we're going to do much tonight. Why? He says. I said, well, they just don't ever bite, and it's going to rain, and it rained through the night. Well, at the end of the night, he said, I thought you said they weren't going to bite good tonight. Well, I said, they never have, but we caught like 60 that night.
Really?
More than normally, there hadn't been that many times at night that I've even caught 60, but that night they bit, the big ones bit, they bit everywhere. Nobody was on the lake, and I thought, man, I didn't even understand how that happened, but it did.
Yeah. You said in several other instances, there's always an exception to the rule. So you always get those nights.
That was it.
That was it. For those of you that don't know, and most people in North Georgia do, but for those of you that don't know, Bill also runs a guide service. Do you do night trips?
I do. In fact, for the past many years, probably from the end of May through the end of August, 99% of my trips are night trips.
Are night trips, okay.
Now, last summer, with the way Allatoona was fishing during the summer, it's probably the least amount of night fishing that I've done. Well, definitely the least amount of night fishing trips I've done in about 40 years.
Right.
And but I am available for night trips. I always enjoy night fishing. It's one of my little through the years, it's been one of my most favorite things to do. It's cooler.
For sure.
After 11 or 12 o'clock, most of the boats are gone.
Yeah.
It's pleasant out. Normally the fish bite pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's just one of my favorite things in fishing, although as I get older, it's a little bit harder. I love the fish. It's not hard to be out there fishing, and I can stay out there till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and be having the great time. The part that's harder on me is the next day.
Oh yeah, I know.
But I still love it, and I like to do it, and I'm available to do it.
Okay. Well, in a second I'm gonna have him shout out his numbers and all that. But when this video gets posted to YouTube, I will have all his contact information and a link to his site in the description. So you definitely want to check that out. But for somebody who just wants the number right now or how to get in touch with you, how could they do it?
Well, my number is 706-280-2305, but you can just Google Bill Payne Guide Service.
Mm-hmm.
You can get on Facebook and just search Bill Payne Guide Service, and I should pop up right in front of you.
You do,
and
yeah.
you can get any information off of that. Contact me. I'm going to be doing day trips and night trips this summer as necessary, and probably if I could, I'd probably just sleep all day and fish at night all the time.
Boy, wouldn't that be the life right there? Well, I tell you what, Bill, first of all, thank you for taking some time coming down here. Again, it's that time for the night bite to really kick on, so I'm glad you shared a little bit of your wisdom. And guys, when I say a little bit of wisdom, hey, man's been doing it for over 40 years. In this area, everybody knows that Bill knows exactly what he's talking about. So hopefully you could take a little bit of the wisdom that he gave you tonight and go out on your own. Again, be safe. He said that's the most important thing. And put this into practice. And look for that magical range, 12 to 24. Make sure it's got that little spot, that little something special right there on that drop-off. And a little bit heavier spinnerbait,
now,
slow
one
roll.
thing I want to say.
Okay, you can.
That people misinterpret some of that 12 to 24.
Yeah.
The boat may be sitting in 36. It
Yeah.
may be sitting in 45. But that's where your bait needs to be.
Bait
but
needs
you
to be
can't
there.
sit in 24 and your bait be in 24.
Yes, that's a good point.
And one of the most common things I hear from people I take, and it's been said dozens and dozens of times, is, oh, I've been sitting on top of where I need to be fishing.
For sure.
So
yeah,
stay away from that. It doesn't matter what depth your boat's in. It's what depth your bait is in.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, guys, right there, he's still dropping it. You ought to book a trip with him, and I'm sure you can learn even more. So, again, Bill, we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys watching. Take what you heard today, put it into use, and we'll see you on the next one.